Hello and welcome to Math with Mrs. Becker. Today in calculus we are going to look at the first part of section 8.3 where we look at the derivative of the sine and the cosine function. Now the derivative of the sine is the cosine. The derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. So these are the two new rules. Okay, now these hold true exactly like this as long as you only have like the sine of t, or the sine of x, or the sine of y, where it's just one variable. But if you ever have anything more than just a single variable, what you're doing is combining this with the chain rule. So what you would do, you would take the derivative of the sine, which is the cosine, keep the original function the same, then multiply by the derivative of whatever you have with that trig ratio. Okay, so the derivative of a cosine with a function, the derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. You would keep this the same, then multiply by the derivative. So let's go ahead and look. One thing that you'll notice, you are going to use multiple methods for finding the derivative. In this section, we will look at general power rule, constant multiple rule, product rule, quotient rule, natural logs, anything that we've covered so far in Calc. You can have that occur with trig, okay? So the first one, this is going to be the chain rule because I have a sine with something other than just one variable. The derivative of a sine is a cosine. You keep this the same, so it's 3t. This is more than just a variable, so now I have to take the derivative of that. The derivative of 3t is 3. So your derivative is 3 times the cosine of 3t. Okay, the next one. First thing that I would do here is do the constant multiple rule. I can take that 2 out front and then find the derivative of the cosine of 2t. You are allowed to take those constants out front. So 2, the derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. You keep the 2t the same. Because this is more than just a t, now I take the derivative of this, which is 2. I can multiply the 2 and the negative and the 2 all together. The 2t is connected to the sine, so I can't do anything there, but 2 times 2 is 4 times a negative. It's negative 4 times the sine of 2t. That is the derivative. Okay, here's another one that's just a chain rule. The derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. You keep the negative 4t. Now I take the derivative of this, which is negative 4. Negative times a negative is a positive, so this is 4 times the sine of negative 4t, and that would be the derivative. Next one is going to be the general power rule. This 5 would go out front. So 5, we keep the group the same, t squared plus 3 times the sine of t, reduce the exponent. Now I multiply it by the derivative of the inside. This is the sum rule. I just take the derivative of each piece separately. The derivative of t squared is 2t. Plus, if I take a 3 out and then I take the derivative of the sine, that's the cosine of t. So the derivative of this piece is 3 times the cosine of t. You can leave it like this. The other option, because you do not have an exponent on 2t plus 3 cosine of t, you could distribute the 5 in if you wanted to, but it is okay just to leave it like this. Okay, next one is another example of the chain rule. The derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. We keep the t squared plus 1 the same. Now you multiply by the derivative of the inside, which is 2t. Negative 1 times 2t is a negative 2t times the sine of t squared plus 1. Done. Next one, what you need to remember is that when you have an exponent with trig, typically they'll put it in between the trig function and the variable. This means the cosine of t squared. That's what this means. So what you do here, bring the 2 out front, keep the cosine the same, reduce the exponent by 1, so it would just be 1 cosine, times the derivative of what's on the inside. The derivative of a cosine is a negative sine. So positive times a negative, this is a negative 2 times the cosine of t times the sine of t. Done. Okay, now the next one, it's easy to look and think that you're doing the quotient rule. We're not, because the bottom does not have a variable. This is the same thing as negative 1/3 times the sine of 3t. So I can use the constant multiple rule. That means I can take my 1/3 out front, now take the derivative of this. The derivative of a sine is a cosine. I leave 3t. Take the derivative of 3t and I get a 3. I can multiply these things together because they're not connected to that trig ratio. Negative times a positive is a negative. 1/3 of 3 is 1. So it's negative cosine of 3t. That's the derivative. Now the next one. This is the product rule because I am multiplying two things together that both contain a variable. Product rule, the first thing that you're multiplying, that is f of x. So f of x is t. G of x, the second thing, is a cosine of t. Now remember with the product rule, you keep f of x the same times the derivative of g of x, which is negative sine of t, plus you keep g of x, cosine of t, times the derivative of f of x, which would be a 1. Now you look to see if there's anything in common. There's nothing that I can take out. This t is connected to the cosine. This t is connected to the sine. So you could not remove a t. So what I would do is just simplify these. Positive times a negative is a negative. T times the sine of t plus cosine of t times 1 is cosine of t. Done. Okay, let's look at the back side. This is another example of the product rule, just in case on the last example you were thinking, holy smokes, it's been a long time, okay? So f of x is the first function. In our case, it's t squared. G of x is the second function. It's cosine of 3t. When I do the product rule, keep f of x the same times the derivative of g of x. The derivative of a cosine is negative sine. Keep the 3t the same times 3. So that's the first piece. Now the second chunk, keep g of x the same. So the cosine of 3t times the derivative of f of x, that's 2t. So now I look and see what they have in common. The only thing I see, here's a t and here's a t that are not connected to the trig functions. So I can take one t out. So this would become 1t, and this t would be gone because I moved it to the outside. Negative t and 3 can all be multiplied. So negative 3t times the sine of 3t plus this would be 2 times the cosine of 3t. So we have t outside of negative 3t, sine of 3t plus 2 times the cosine of 3t. That is the derivative using the product rule. Now the next one is the quotient rule. The reason why this is the quotient rule is because I have a variable on both the top and the bottom. Remember when you're doing the quotient rule, f of x is the numerator, so it's the sine of 2t. G of x is the denominator, so it's just a t. Quotient rule, the top, you keep g of x the same times the derivative of f of x. The derivative of a sine is a cosine. I keep 2t the same, multiply it by the derivative of 2t, which is 2, minus, keep the top the same, sine of 2t times the derivative of the bottom, which is 1. When I look at this, I can multiply these two things together, making this 2t times the cosine of 2t minus 1 times the sine of 2t is the sine of 2t. So that's the top. When you do the quotient rule, the denominator is always g squared. So it would be t squared. Okay, let's look at the next one. This is going to be the product rule because I'm multiplying two things together that both have a variable. F of x is e to the power of t. g of x is the sine of 2t. Product rule, keep the first term the same times the derivative of the second term. The derivative of a sine is a cosine of 2t times the derivative of 2t, that's a 2. Plus, keep the second term the same, sine of 2t times the derivative of the first term. Well, the derivative of e to the t is e to the t. With the product rule, you look to see what they have in common to take out. So e to the power of t goes out front. I would have 2 times the cosine of 2t plus the sine of 2t. There is your derivative. Last one, it's natural log. Remember the derivative of a natural log of x. That is 1 over x. So I know that this is going to be the chain rule because it's more than just an x. So the derivative, because it's a natural log, is 1 over whatever you have in the place of x. For us, that's sine of 2t times the derivative of this. The derivative of a sine is a cosine. Keep the 2t times the derivative of 2t is a 2. This is the same thing as cosine of 2t times 2 over 1. So top times top, bottom times bottom. We'd have 2 times the cosine of 2t over the sine of 2t. That's the derivative of the sine and the cosine, bringing back all of those previous derivative rules that we've talked about this year. What you want to do today is complete the quick quiz. It's just four or five basic questions, and then there is a suggested assignment if you feel like you need more practice. I hope you enjoyed our time together today, and I'll talk to you soon.